Olá, bom dia, Brasil, boa tarde, equipe holandesa. É uma honra conduzir, juntamente com Jean-Paul Korten, o segundo dia de debate do Fórum Internacional Recife Exchange Netherlands 2021, Águas como Patrimônio, visões e estratégias para a elevação do nível do mar no Recife e nos Países Baixos, que esse ano celebra uma parceria de 10 anos entre a Universidade Federal de Pernambuco e a Agência de Patrimônio Cultural do Reino dos Países Baixos, RCE, hoje articulada com a ONU Habitat. E, bom, nesse momento, o RXN integra-se ao Circuito Urbano 2021 e pretendendo contribuir para, no mês seguinte, o que vai ser a 26ª Climate Change Conference of the Parties, ou seja, a COP26 da ONU, em Glasgow, no Reino Unido. Bom, para a gente se situar, o evento se estrutura em dois grandes momentos. O primeiro módulo é esse ano, nessa semana, até o dia 15, que vai investigar o território do Recife, considerada a capital mais antiga do país, primeiro plano urbanístico renascentista das Américas e 16º hotspot climático, ameaçado de ter boa parte do seu território submerso nas próximas décadas. No ano seguinte, a meta é investigar um outro território, nos Países Baixos, onde uma imensa parte da nação também está ameaçada frente ao aumento do nível do mar. Enquanto o debate de ontem lançava algumas bases iniciais para essa discussão, hoje nós podemos dizer que a reflexão geral foca em casos um pouco mais práticos, reflexivos, onde os temas aqui discutidos serão estratégias de adaptação e proteção à subida do nível dos oceanos. Então, a princípio, podemos dizer que, enquanto proteção é uma visão mais comum, que estaria relacionadas a soluções ou estratégias que têm como objetivo combater o nível da água, esse aumento direto da água que entraria no território, a adaptação, por outro lado, considera a possibilidade de termos um território com uma convivência direta com as frentes d'água, oceanos, rios, canais, etc., considerando que elas, de fato, vão entrar e conviver diretamente com toda a infraestrutura e estrutura existente na cidade. Bom, o dia começará com a Carta da Paisagem das Américas, apresentada pela professora e pesquisadora Lúcia Veres. Então, Lúcia, bom dia, por favor. Talvez antes de começar, Lúcia, para a gente apresentar só mais adiante a nossa agenda desse dia, em seguida, nós teremos uma série de 3 palestras de proteção e adaptação, onde teremos o professor Marcos Silva iniciando, da UFPE, representando o Centro de Estudos Avançados, e trazendo para a gente uma perspectiva oceânica das cidades marinhas do planeta. Em seguida, nós vamos ter a apresentação de Sarah Lindberg, que é da UK Berkeley, onde nós teremos infraestrutura crítica de resiliências com soluções baseadas na natureza. E mais adiante, o professor Alan Platos, da Universidade de Yale, dos Estados Unidos, pensando em como projetar comunidades resilientes às mudanças climáticas. Em seguida, nós passaremos a moderação do painel seguinte para Jean-Paul Korten, da Agência de Patrimônio Cultural dos Países Baixos, que seguirá com a apresentação dos demais palestrantes dos Países Baixos. E, ao final, nós vamos ter uma mesa redonda, unindo os painéis, para que possamos debater tanto proteção quanto adaptação, como elas se articulam entre si e como juntas podemos provocar e buscar a cidade que precisamos para o século XXI, como nos coloca a ONU. Muito obrigada. Lúcia, agora, por favor, a fala é sua.
Bom dia a todas e a todos. É um prazer estar aqui, agradeço o convite e poder falar um pouco sobre a Carta da Paisagem das Américas. Eu vou compartilhar minha tela. E partir desse entendimento da Carta da Paisagem das Américas pelos princípios e desafios para se pensar o futuro. Eu inicio colocando que há uma íntima relação entre carta e paisagem. Essa relação ela está na própria origem da paisagem como conceito, pioneiramente revelado pelo relato do poeta Francesco Petrarca, que, ao subir o Monte Ventoux na França, em 1335, descreve seu êxtase diante da paisagem, inaugurando um olhar moderno sobre o mundo. A Carta de Petrarca oficializa o nascimento da paisagem pela palavra escrita, a partir do olhar para o horizonte distante. Em sintonia com o tempo, inúmeras outras cartas fundem-se em narrativas que fundamentam a paisagem como forma do pensamento, condição tanto às categorias científicas quanto àquelas que expressam apreensão sensível pela arte. Hoje, as cartas de paisagem guardam dessa origem mais pretérita o olhar mais abrangente, mas vão mais além. Segundo Busquet Fábrica e Cortinas, Ramos, a carta de paisagem é um instrumento voluntário de consulta e mediação entre agentes públicos e privados do território, dirigido a promover a melhora das paisagens e da qualidade de vida das pessoas, mediante o estabelecimento de objetivos de qualidade paisagística, estratégias, medidas e ações, através de um programa de gestão dinâmica da paisagem. A Carta da Paisagem das Américas, ela foi construída e publicada em 2018 pela Inflaméricas, na Cidade do México, em sua conferência regional, e foi construída por um comitê redator composto de 4 ou de 5 arquitetos paisagistas. Raquel Penhalosa, do Canadá, Saúl Alcântara, do México, Tereu Cerro, do México, Carlos Janquilevich, da Costa Rica, e eu, do Laboratório da Paisagem, da UFPE, representando o Brasil. A carta ela parte como instrumento principal, propulsor, a Convenção Europeia da Paisagem, que, por sua vez, se apoia em outros grandes instrumentos, como a Recomendação Paris Paisagens e Sítios, a Convenção de Benelux, a Carta de Sevilha e a Recomendação NR-95, da qual a própria Convenção recorta o conceito de paisagem. Ela é considerada o primeiro tratado regional com foco na paisagem, dedicando-se à proteção, gestão e ordenamento das paisagens europeias. Cabe à gestão conservar os traços significativos em uma perspectiva de desenvolvimento sustentável, sempre quando respeite a vontade da população de usufruir dessas paisagens. A Convenção ela se estrutura em 3 grandes palavras-chave: proteção, gestão e ordenamento. A Carta da Paisagem das Américas substitui proteção por conservação, mantém a gestão e substitui ordenamento por planejamento e desenho. E, dessa forma, ela contempla tanto as paisagens notáveis, como aquelas do cotidiano e também degradadas, numa visão sistêmica. Então, a Carta da Paisagem das Américas, ela foi construída a partir da Convenção, que propulsou ou impulsiona a construção de outras cartas em outros continentes, e também pela análise crítica de 12 cartas que haviam sido construídas nas Américas até 2018. Então, ela tem como objetivo maior o direito à paisagem como bem coletivo e promover conscientização sobre a recuperação, valorização da paisagem e também como elaborar instrumentos que favoreçam o desenvolvimento como arcabouço legal, baseado no presente, pensando sempre na construção do futuro. Ela tem como estrutura o prefácio, o preâmbulo, os considerandos, os princípios, os objetivos, as definições e glossário e a declaratória. Os considerandos, que vão além do próprio continente, mas no sistema global expõem uma visão que afeta as questões que afetam o planeta, tem como princípios, considerando, então, respeitar a diversidade das paisagens da América, considerando respeitar, reposicionar um olhar educadamente sobre as paisagens, considerando revisar os paradigmas que mantêm a insustentabilidade, deter um olhar especial às cidades e às paisagens de patrimônio, reconhecer o papel e a responsabilidade dos arquitetos da paisagem e demais profissionais na preservação, conservação e produção de novas paisagens e, em destaque, compreender a nossa responsabilidade diante das mudanças climáticas e do aquecimento global. Os considerandos, junto das leituras que foram feitas das 12 cartas e dos estudos sobre o que é a América, chegou-se à definição dos seus 5 princípios. O primeiro princípio, compreender-se como parte do todo vivo, é a condição primeira que antecede a todos os outros, por nos situar na base vital e fisiológica de nossa existência, por sermos parte constituinte da natureza. O segundo princípio, de respeito a se recuperar a cosmovisão e a visão de sacralidade, como uma das características intrínsecas que define a formação do americano, fruto da relação que os povos originários estabeleceram com a terra e com seus deuses, dando sentido à sua existência. O terceiro princípio, o palimpsesto do território, considerar as singularidades do palimpsesto em escalas de espaço e de tempo, a fim de diminuir as desigualdades sociais e manter a identidade das Américas. Este princípio é dirigido especialmente às cidades. O quarto princípio, ética, na sua relação com a estética, quando se propõe a resgatar o vínculo ancestral entre o homem e a natureza, no entendimento para além dos parâmetros antropocêntricos, quando há uma compreensão do mundo natural como valor moral. E o quinto princípio, a americanidade como identidade, se propõe a redescobrir as raízes da americanidade como condição para se pensar o futuro, associada ao respeito à natureza, à cultura, valores, às singularidades da diversidade, do direito à paisagem como bem coletivo, e também incorpora aí o direito à felicidade para todos. A partir dos princípios, a América foi então desconstruída em 5 estratos: natureza, cosmovisão, cultura, ética e americanidade. Parte então do primeiro extrato, a natureza, compreendendo que não há paisagens se não houver natureza. A natureza será sempre a matriz das paisagens, é o que diz a filósofa Adriana Serrão. Então, passa-se a América, do Alasca à Patagônia, entendendo a sua diversidade de paisagens e natureza. O segundo extrato, a cosmovisão, de respeito aos aspectos metafísicos da paisagem, que incorpora espiritualidade, sacralidade, sentimentos da alma e do misticismo, do simples e do sublime associado ao imaginário individual e coletivo dos povos originários. No Brasil, por exemplo, hoje, existem cerca de 250 etnias que falam mais de 150 línguas e dialetos. Ao longo de toda a América, os povos originários resistem. O terceiro extrato da América é considerado a partir dos 3 palimpsestos. O primeiro, que antecede a chegada dos colonizadores, então das civilizações astecas, maias, incas, zapotecas, toltecas, por exemplo. O segundo extrato, de respeito à relação das paisagens que foram produzidas dos colonizados com os colonizadores. E o terceiro palimpsesto, das paisagens contemporâneas com as suas diversidades sociais. O quarto extrato, de respeito à ética, é quando se reconhece que a natureza não é inesgotável. Pauta-se nos valores do território e na compreensão de que as paisagens devem ser desenhadas e geridas com ética ambiental. Isso, por exemplo, não é o que está acontecendo no Brasil. No projeto da Amazônia Andina, por exemplo, em 2020, foram detectados 242 focos de incêndio na Amazônia, 95% dos quais eram ilegais, 14 unidades de conservação foram atingidas, terras indígenas, e aí, consequentemente, a destruição da natureza, o que colabora para o aquecimento global. As cidades também devem ser desenhadas com ética ambiental, isso de respeito ao quarto extrato. A cidade do Recife, por exemplo, nosso objeto de estudo, a atual implantação de um projeto numa frente d'água costeira, nas bordas de um sítio histórico, não respeita as pré-existências, expõe à acirra as desigualdades sociais e desconsidera as ameaças das mudanças climáticas. Que estética é essa que não respeita a ética ambiental? O quinto extrato, a americanidade, é uma superposição da natureza com a cosmovisão, cultura e a ética. É quando se relacionam todos os demais extratos, compreendendo que essa inter-relação e interdependência dá um sentido à nossa americanidade como identidade. Esse esquema ele resume a construção da Carta de uma maneira geral, quando a América é desconstruída em estratos e reconstruída em 5 princípios, e esses princípios geraram 18 objetivos como desafios, reunidos em 3 âmbitos: no âmbito técnico, no âmbito educativo e no âmbito político. No âmbito técnico, que se reconhece a Carta como instrumento que auxilia o planejamento, a gestão, a conservação e o desenho de novas paisagens. Que o gesto de desenhá-la seja inserido em ações governamentais que considere a sustentabilidade, a memória, as idiosincrasias e desejos da população. Que a ética ambiental seja princípio propulsor de ações sobre as paisagens. No âmbito educativo, sem educação paisagística e patrimonial, não será possível consolidar uma cultura que respeita a paisagem como patrimônio. No âmbito político, que é o mais complexo, porque depende de acordos entre países, com o propósito de ser um instrumento de confluência de um pensamento americano de paisagem, o primeiro dos desafios é reconhecê-lo como um documento que estabeleça um marco conceitual que possa auxiliar a aproximação entre as Américas e alimentar a construção de instrumentos de políticas públicas produtoras de paisagens americanas. Se formos pensar no Recife em relação às mudanças climáticas, quais seriam os desafios técnicos, educativos e políticos? Eu não tenho a resposta, mas tenho muitas perguntas. Até que ponto é possível interferir e ou evitar as transformações? Como conviver com as transformações sem perder os atributos? Como incorporar a população nas decisões de adaptação? como inserir no planejamento sistemas de transporte sustentável, como tornar o Recife mais saudável, como informar ou formar tecnogestores e a população sobre as mudanças climáticas, inserir essas preocupações na educação formal, como desenhar o futuro, considerando a participação social. E do âmbito político, como as mudanças climáticas podem definir políticas públicas que independam de gestões de determinados governos. Se o nosso governo atual está interessado em resolver problemas, temos que manter esse interesse para as próximas gestões. Como definir instrumentos de controle e uso da ocupação do solo, inserir a população no planejamento e na gestão, e como gerir politicamente o processo de transformação. E eu concluo, então, falando dessa palavra felicidade, que ela aparece com força na Carta da Paisagem das Américas, e o desejo por felicidade ele é recorrente em 4 outras cartas da América, do Chile, da Colômbia, da Costa Rica, da América Central e do Caribe. Eu fecho, por fim, com outra carta, escrita por Epicuro para Meneceu, poucos séculos antes de Cristo, conhecida como Carta sobre a Felicidade, que descreve a busca pela harmonia entre corpo e alma, acreditando-se que preservar a vontade e a liberdade são preceitos fundamentais ao bem-estar, incluindo a consciência moral. O desejo por felicidade hoje inclui como desafio compreender a natureza nos lugares e dos lugares, considerar as distintas escalas do planejamento, inserir essa compreensão em políticas públicas, assumir a gestão como prioridade para a conservação dos lugares e da vida, investir em mudanças de hábito e de paradigmas com vistas à sustentabilidade do planeta. Estética, só com ética ambiental. Ética, só com envolvimento e participação social. Participação social exige, por fim, o direito à educação, à saúde e à paisagem. Obrigada.
Obrigada, Lucinha. Importantíssima reflexão, especialmente para nós que estamos a caminho de desenvolver uma carta em desenvolvimento do Recife, para mandar a nossa mensagem dentro da reflexão desse fórum e articulando com N outras reflexões já existentes para a COP26, ao final desse workshop. Então, acredito que estamos diante de uma grande oportunidade em mãos. E para essa cidade do século XXI, felicidade é uma das vertentes, né, da linha de frente. Acho que precisamos encarar as mudanças climáticas numa visão muito mais positiva, muito mais de oportunidade de reinvenção, do que como uma perspectiva de puramente catastrófica, né? Então, talvez para avançar nesse debate um pouco mais enérgico, podemos abrir o nosso primeiro bloco, referente à adaptação e proteção, medidas e estratégias que o mundo está desenvolvendo. Então, para a primeira fala, gostaria de convidar o professor Marcos Silva, do Departamento de Oceanografia da Universidade Federal de Pernambuco, Centro de Estudos Avançados, CEA, para nos trazer a perspectiva oceanográfica dessa elevação do nível do mar no Recife e no planeta. Marcos, a palavra é sua. Professor, acho que seu áudio está ligado.
Ok. Abriu.
Funcionando.
Então, bom dia a todos a todo o time brasileiro, e boa tarde para o time holandês, né, europeu. Eu vou falar um pouco sobre a elevação do nível do mar, tá, e as consequências para o futuro do Recife, sob um ponto de vista oceanográfico, tá, que é a minha formação, né? Eu sou professor de oceanografia da Universidade Federal, então eu vou falar sobre esse ponto de vista de mudanças climáticas, mas sobre esse viés oceanográfico. Vamos lá, passou. Então, eu tenho uma pequena agenda, falando sobre mudanças climáticas e a esteira convectiva, né, a correia transportadora de calor, que é o motor de transformação do clima no planeta. Tá? Então, não adianta a gente falar sobre transformação se a gente não fala sobre esse mecanismo principal de propulsor de transformação, que é a correia transportadora de calor, que envolve o oceano, tá? E conecta os 3 principais oceanos. Depois a gente vai falar um pouco sobre SST, né, Sea Surface Temperature, a temperatura da superfície do mar, os ventos alísios, a elevação do nível do mar como consequência desse aquecimento e desses ventos, né? E aí, para Recife, a gente tem ainda a consequência de fortes chuvas, né? de forte precipitação em escalas de tempo reduzida e que tenha ocorrido com mais e mais frequência nesse século XXI. Tá? Então, aí a gente fala um pouco sobre as ilhas do Recife, sobre o mangue e sobre essa paisagem estuarina que Recife está inserida, né? E de como a gente é dependente desse cenário, né? de mangue estuarino que interage, que conversa entre o oceano e o continente, né? E onde Recife está inserido. E aí eu trago um pouco das ODS, né? Dos goals lá de desenvolvimento sustentável da ONU, tá? Para Recife, fechando com a conclusão como uma esperança, uma perspectiva de como é que a gente pode conviver seguindo essas perspectivas e essas ordenanças, né, esses goals da ONU, né, das ODS, e trazendo essa perspectiva para um lado positivo, respeitando o que é que está acontecendo com o planeta, né, e, consequentemente, com a nossa cidade, que é o nosso foco e objeto de estudo. Tá? Então, inicialmente, a gente fala sobre mudanças climáticas, a gente fala sobre o elemento fundamental, que é a cidade, né? Então, toda mudança e consequência de aquecimento global, ela é fruto de um modelo de desenvolvimento baseado no desenvolvimento industrial e que concentrou a população em cidades, em metrópoles. Tá? Esse crescimento ele é todo baseado em queima de energia de combustível fóssil, né? Então, a gente tem a indústria, o transporte, tudo baseado em queima de combustível fóssil, né? Então, a gente tem 1/3 do que é queimado devido a transporte em grandes metrópoles. Tá? Então, a gente tem uma média de 9 gigatoneladas por ano de queima de carbono, né? Produzindo dióxido de carbono, e 1/3 disso é devido ao transporte, por exemplo. Tá? A gente tem uma grande contribuição aqui em Recife, aqui no Brasil, de queima de floresta, né? Como um agente que emite e que produz CO2 para a atmosfera, né? Esse CO2, parte dele é absorvido pelos oceanos. E aí, como a gente vê na atmosfera, enquanto na atmosfera esse CO2 ele é inerte e produz um aquecimento, né? Ele induz o aquecimento do clima do planeta, no oceano ele reage com a água e acidifica essas águas. Então, a gente tem uma consequência ainda maior e mais elevada para os oceanos, né? A gente vê aquela película d'água na superfície e acha que está tudo bem, mas embaixo d'água a gente tem um cenário que pode ser catastrófico, ainda mais catastrófico do que para as cidades. Tá? Então, a gente tem uma comprovação, a partir desse último relatório do IPCC, que saiu agora em 2021, uma comprovação, uma certificação de que é a ação humana que tem atuado no aquecimento, né? Eu trago uma curva de aquecimento da temperatura na superfície do planeta associado ao crescimento e ao aumento na elevação das emissões ao longo do século XX. Tá? Então, a partir desse relatório, os outros relatórios já mostravam, mas não davam essa preponderância às emissões e a responsabilidade das cidades e a responsabilidade humana no aumento dessa temperatura. Tá? Mas aí a gente tem um fenômeno que é o propulsor da elevação da superfície do mar e que avança sobre as cidades litorâneas, que é a correia transportadora de calor. Tá? Em vermelho, a gente tem o transporte de água quente, né, da parte superficial dos oceanos, que está conectado com o transporte de águas frias na circulação profunda, que está representado pelas setas e pelas linhas azuis, nesse mapa aqui de cima. Tá? Então, o gatilho propulsor dessa circulação oceânica global, que distribui calor para o planeta, e é o principal responsável de distribuição de calor no planeta, são os oceanos, a gente tem o principal propulsor aqui no Atlântico Norte. Tá? Com o congelamento de águas, a gente tem uma bomba propulsora devido ao aumento de salinidade que afunda essas águas e impulsiona a circulação profunda. Tá? Então, essa conexão de água quente pela superfície e aquecendo a costa da Europa e aquecendo o hemisfério norte, principalmente com o transporte interhemisférico do Atlântico, a gente tem a propulsão desse mecanismo. Com o aquecimento da temperatura do planeta, nós percebemos e temos registrado derretimento da calota polar e o aporte de água doce maior do que o registrado em milhões e milhões de anos. Tá? Isso é devido ao desenvolvimento industrial desses últimos 250 anos. E esse derretimento da calota polar diminui a salinidade da água, diminui essa densidade e diminui a pressão dessa água fria e menos salina no processo de circulação profunda. Isso diminui o transporte de calor da faixa equatorial, como eu vejo aqui embaixo no mapa de distribuição de temperatura da superfície do mar. A gente tem muito calor na região tropical e esse calor é distribuído pelas correntes oceânicas para as regiões temperadas e polares. Então, uma vez que a gente diminui esse processo de transferência de calor interhemisférico da região equatorial para os polos, a gente tem uma diminuição dessa circulação profunda. Tá? E isso acarreta um acúmulo de calor na região tropical. Esse acúmulo de calor na região tropical, ele é associado a uma intensificação dos ventos alísios. Tá? Então, a gente tem a principal mecanismo aqui para Recife, dos alísios de sudeste, né? E a gente tem a combinação aqui dos alísios de nordeste. Nessa zona de convergência, nós temos muita formação de nuvem, tá? Devido à formação de cédulas de Hartley. Tá? Então, em região equatorial, muita evaporação, formação de nuvens, aquecimento e acúmulo de calor na região tropical vai trazer intensificação de ventos e acúmulo de chuva para essa região tropical, principalmente para as bordas oestes dos oceanos. Tá? Então, todas as bordas oestes dos oceanos, tanto Pacífico quanto Atlântico, para a região tropical, vai ter um processo de intensificação de chuva, de formação de chuva. Tá? Esse aquecimento do oceano vai trazer dilatação e esse vento alísio vai trazer empilhamento de água para as bordas oeste. Isso é fruto e vai ser consequência para todas as cidades de fronteira oeste, de região tropical e subtropical. Então, não só Recife, mas New Orleans, Santos, Rio de Janeiro, Índia, cidades do Pacífico, também Japão, todas elas vão sofrer com o mesmo fenômeno. Tá? Então, isso não é um fenômeno restrito a Recife, mas Recife ela tem uma característica particular com relação às outras cidades. Né? Então, Recife ela passou por um problema de cheias consequentes, de muita chuva, né, na cabeceira dos rios, na década de 60 e 70. Isso são fotos das cheias, né, que trouxeram a elevação do nível das águas 3 metros, 4 metros acima do nível. Né? Mas isso foi um problema causado e que foi contido com a construção de um sistema de barragens que conteve essa água. O que a gente prevê para o futuro é que essa elevação agora ela vai vir do mar. Né? A gente vai ter uma elevação do nível do mar como consequência da expansão da temperatura do calor, né? Devido à expansão térmica da água superficial, e uma intensificação desses ventos que vão trazer essas águas oceânicas para dentro do continente. Tá? Acima dessa elevação do nível do mar, a gente ainda tem uma consequência de marés astronômicas que ocorrem aqui semidiurnamente, ou seja, 2 vezes por dia a gente tem uma variação da elevação da maré, né, do nível do mar já de 2 metros. Então, some esses 2 metros de elevação do nível do mar devido à mudança climática aos 2 metros de marés altas ao longo do dia. Né? Então, isso tudo dificulta drenagem urbana, né, e dificulta por conta da maior ocorrência de chuvas extremas que estão previstas dentro desses cenários de previsão do IPCC. Tá? Então, a gente tem um cenário de paisagem no Recife, né? Eu trouxe aqui uma foto do rio Capibaribe, né? Que corta toda a cidade do Recife, e a gente tem uma cidade plantada dentro de um estuário, né? Que tem tem vida marinha, com plâncton, com peixes, com caranguejos, com tartarugas, com capivaras. Né? Não é à toa que o nome do rio é Rio Capibaribe, em alusão às capivaras, capibara, Capibaribe. Né? Então, a gente tem dentro desse cenário, intrusão salina, ciclos de marés, que é necessário para manter flora e fauna dessa cidade, que tem ligação e dependência com pesca e com alimento e renda dos mais vulneráveis na cidade, né? Os que são desvalidos socialmente, eles fazem uso desse ecossistema para retirar a própria subsistência, né? Comunidades como Ilha de Deus, aqui embaixo, ou Pina, Brasília Teimosa, Bode, são várias comunidades que sobrevivem de pesca e que estão inseridas dentro desse cenário de água, né? Então, a gente tem, além da herança cultural e econômica para zelar, nós temos uma herança ecológica e social muito importante, né, que está sofrendo pressão da elevação, devido à elevação do nível do mar, né? Mas aí a gente tem também uma prerrogativa, uma orientação da ONU em seguir esses objetivos de desenvolvimento sustentáveis, né? E esses objetivos, se nós partirmos do pressuposto de concordar e de termos a concordância e agirmos em cima desses objetivos, nós temos que trabalhar a redução da desigualdade, nós temos que trabalhar educação de qualidade, né? Equilíbrio em gênero, cidades sustentáveis com justiça social, né? E o pressuposto inicial é que a gente trabalhe com o left behind first, ou seja, que a gente trabalhe com os mais desvalidos, né? Os segregados, primeiro. Então, assim, o principal objetivo é preservar a vida, mas a gente também precisa preservar o oceano e a gente precisa preservar o continente, né? Fazendo isso como? Com compartilhamento de informação, que é isso que a gente está fazendo agora, né? Esse mix de conhecimento interdisciplinar e de diferentes regiões do mundo que a gente consegue mudar esse cenário e prever uma nova perspectiva para a nossa cidade, tá? Então, o que é que a gente vê e o que é que eu sugiro como um oceanógrafo, né, em ver a cidade? A gente precisa ter um olhar das águas, tá? A gente precisa proteger esse patrimônio cultural e histórico dessas ilhas históricas ou dessas ilhas vulneráveis que detêm comunidades ribeirinhas que sobrevivem disso, né? Mas a gente pode usar estruturas naturais, beach rocks, o próprio mangue, né, preservando essa paisagem assim como possível, tá? Então, a gente vendo o Recife de água, a gente também precisa devolver o espaço das águas que nós ocupamos ao longo desse último século, né? A paisagem de Recife, ela era muito mais ambiental do que concretada, né? Ela era muito mais natural do que impermeável, né? E a gente tem que, prevendo esse aumento do nível do mar, não tem como, dentro dessa paisagem plana de Recife, estuarina de Recife, a gente não olhar e não respeitar a ocupação desses espaços. Então, o compartilhamento desses espaços é necessário para que você tenha uma manutenção, inclusive, da vida estuarina dentro desses espaços, né? Ecologicamente, é inviável impermeabilizar, porque a gente vai matar e vai eliminar essa paisagem estuarina na qual a cidade está inserida, né? Ela precisa desses fluxos, ela precisa dessa intrusão de sal, ela precisa dessa variação de elevação para que ela sobreviva. É isso. Minha mensagem de hoje.
Obrigada, Marcos. Agora, dando sequência à nossa discussão de hoje, gostaria de chamar a Sara Lindberg. Ela vai trazer para a gente um pouco da perspectiva de uma infraestrutura crítica de resiliência em função de soluções baseadas na natureza. Sara, querida, a palavra é sua.
Oi, Mila, obrigada. Bom dia. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me share the presentation really quickly. Hopefully everybody can see this. So my name is Sarah, and I'm a PhD candidate from UC Berkeley, and I'm very, very happy and honored to be in this discussion, not just because I've been researching infrastructure and climate resilience for a while, but also as a concerned Brazilian I have been moving around different countries studying this, but also worked in Brazil with disasters and climate adaptation for some years, and I'm very happy to touch base with my home country on this. So to go straight into the point, because we don't have a lot of time, these are the main messages that I thought would be interesting to bring based on my expertise on infrastructure networks and resilience. So the first important thing, and I'm happy that I'm going right after Professor Marcos, is that we need to integrate climate adaptation with disaster risk reduction and vice versa. And I'll talk very briefly about this because it's a complementary information based on what we just saw. And then I'm going to go into explaining the second important point, which is infrastructure networks are vital to urban adaptation. And if we're thinking about urban adaptation, we need to think about these networks as interconnected technology, but also as interconnected environmental and social systems. So let me go into the first information. When you're thinking about sea level rise, it's very important that we bring the information of understanding what total water level means at the human scale and at the infrastructure scale. Normally, when there's a bit of a bias, I want to say, even in standards and policy, that sea level rise is something that happens slowly, kind of like in the bathtub situation. But what really happens, and Professor Marcos explained, Professor Moacir Araújo also talked about this yesterday, is that there are these dynamic coastal flooding processes that have to be integrated into our understanding of sea level rise. And these dynamic coastal flooding processes are usually based on storm surge, river discharge, and wave runup. And in California, a recent study just found out, because there was this bias where you're calculating the effects of sea level rise based on the static regional sea level and ignoring the effect of these dynamic coastal floodings. The recent study found that we have an extra 200,000 exposed people when you include these dynamic processes. So it's really important that we think about sea level rise together with disaster risk, because what will happen very likely is that the first impacts and the strongest impacts that we will feel from sea level rise is going to be through these abrupt events. And this is just an example of one of these events in the San Francisco Bay Area. This is actually my advisor being very responsible. And as you can see here, it's a little bit of
it's very helpful,
the city.
There's no doubt about it. I'm almost thinking, how could you were asking at what stage to apply. I could almost turn that question around and say,
I'm sorry. I think I'm hearing another person talking at the same time.
And that's good.
I don't know what's going on.
I think we discussed
it. Is everything okay? Okay.
Hey, I think that you may proceed.
Okay, sorry. I heard somebody talking at the same time. I wasn't sure if there was something going on. Okay, I'll keep going. So it's important that we keep in mind that when you're thinking about climate adaptation, you also have to think about how to integrate disaster risk reduction with climate adaptation. And now to the second level of my presentation is that when you're thinking about resilience and climate adaptation in urban areas, you also have to think about critical infrastructure assets. Why do you have to think about that? Because critical infrastructures basically represent the highlights, the strengths of cities. They are these arteries that connect things and exchange things. We're talking about water supply, water distribution. We're talking about power, energy, emergency services, telecommunication, transportation. And the inability of any of these systems to function will cause immediate debilitating effects on our safety and well-being. And in Recife, this is just an idea of what this would look like. And it would be a really good exercise that when you're thinking about climate adaptation at city resilience, to think about everything in an interconnected way. This means not only interconnected at the physical level, but also in cross-sectoral levels, because we have to understand that if something fails in one area of the city due to these interconnectivities, there will be cascading effects that will exacerbate the effect of failure of infrastructure. For example, something happens in a coastal flood to the metro system or to the airport or to the emergency services, and it will ripple down and create huge human loss. And in fact, there are a lot of studies that show that we underestimate human loss from disasters because we misunderstand these cascading effects. We're usually looking at these problems from a very, I want to say, compartmentalized perspective, fragmented perspective, where we're protecting individual assets and not thinking about how things will ripple down to the well-being of people and how they use these vital services. So going into what we've been seeing with a lot of these other presentations, we do have to bring in this like holistic view. And this is the main argument that I bring here, is that we have to think of these infrastructure systems not only as technical, but also as social and environmental systems. And one of the very interesting examples that I've seen this applied in the landscape is with this project that just came out, which is called the Bay Area Adaptation Atlas. So this is in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And there's this is the link to the atlas if you're interested. It's really very fascinating. And I'll give you a little bit of some examples of how they actually use landscape processes, the understanding of landscape processes, to propose nature-based solutions for coastal flooding. And I'll give you a little bit of examples in my expertise, which is critical infrastructures. I've been working with airports and energy systems, and I'll give you some examples of those. So the first thing that they do that is very interesting is that they rethink the boundaries of systems, the same way that we like to do here in Brazil a lot with watersheds. They do that, but they add a bunch of other layers. They rethink boundaries. They add geomorphological unit boundaries. They add the sea level rise. They add sediment supply information. They add habitat types, tidal ranges, and land use to actually propose adaptations that matches the scale of the Bay Area and not these fragmented jurisdiction scales that we usually see a lot of these adaptation implementations arise. And the other important part is that they incorporate environmental and social processes into these scales. And when they do that, they can actually propose a range. And this is just some examples of the range of solutions that they have. They divided between structural and unstructural. And the structural types of solutions are usually things that we see in the landscape. So we can touch them, it's palpable. And we have the traditional kind of gray infrastructure, which are flood walls and levees. But we also have these nature-based solutions, which are palpable, but they are being very much pushed in policy in California legislation and European legislation, because they provide what we call ecosystem services, but also they manage risk and they have very low impact technology. The other important thing is that they use technology, or they promote technology that is owned by local people. And we believe that these nature-based solutions, together with these non-structural solutions, which are disconnected from the physical landscape, they're talking about like policy, zoning, market incentives, and they all of these solutions are integrated in different ways. They feed into each other. But if you really focus on mostly the non-structural and the nature-based, if you integrate them better to the gray infrastructure systems, we have more ability to respond to climate uncertainties and changes in societal values, which means just the changes that we have in our relationships with the landscape, our relationships with water, and our expectations from critical infrastructure services, for example. So this, I'm gonna briefly go through some examples, and we can go into more detail later. But this is just an example of a mixed approach where they're using a structural mixed approach where you're using berms, which is like a traditional gray infrastructure, and but also breaching some of these berms to reconnect the tidal marshes and expand mud flats, reconnect tidal marshes to marsh restoration areas. And the idea, it's very close to what was presented in more detail from Professor Paola Vigano and Paul Mers yesterday. It's the idea of letting waters regain their territory, and also reconnect with waterscapes. So use these areas for recreational purposes and gain co-benefits from different perspectives. And they do this for all of the Bay. And this is just an example on the maps of the types of nature-based solutions that they suggest. This is a San Francisco airport. And here you can see the airport in the landscape. These are the runways right here. Just these runways right here, just so you can have an idea of where we are. And they propose a series of solutions. Some of them include reconnecting the creeks to the bayland. Other solutions are increasing mud flats, increasing tideland marshes, also promoting green stormwater infrastructure, showing areas that are suitable for submerged aquatic vegetation. And all of these, of course, they work together to limit the duration of exposure to waves, as well as the wave sizes. They are effective to let sediment flow back into the bay, also mitigate the effects of storm floods. There are a lot of information in the atlas. They give you a lot of these insights. And the problem is, again, that if you look at the shoreline inventory, very much like Professor Marco Silva was talking about Recife, there was a lot of flood-proofing infrastructure. This is the main dominant framework that we have, especially in urbanized areas. And it creates a lot of problems because they're absolutely counterproductive with great public challenges of disaster risk reduction, social equality, ecosystem conservation, and ends up locking us in these mechanisms that are mostly band-aid solutions and not a good solution to a complex problem, which should be seen as a complex problem. And this is kind of, as we see, this is iterating over and over from different presentations, and I think it's important that we talk about it. And just to give you an example, San Francisco Airport is a major international hub. It's very exposed to coastal flooding from sea level rise, but also from dynamic processes throughout the century, and they've been dealing with this problem already. These are some of the current infrastructures that they have in place. This is from their environmental impact report. They're showing that their infrastructure is not enough because, they're showing the efficiency is not high enough, no wall, not high enough, not high enough. All these concrete infrastructure systems, they've become obsolete because obviously when they were designed, they were thinking about climate models, or not even climate models, they were thinking about historical statistics on climate that became obsolete now that we know that historic climate is no longer suitable for future projections. And now what are they proposing? This is what they're proposing, which, there are a lot of complexities to this, but I'm just showing as an example. More gray infrastructure, which is predominant. A lot of these concrete walls and different types of technologies that are important, but are really just focused on gray infrastructure. And the problem, again, when it's really focused on these gray infrastructures, we have, as I said, as other people have explained, large-scale disturbances to local communities and ecosystems. These investments are capital intensive. Some people have the money to invest in this type of thing, but not everybody's going to have the amount of resources. SFO Airport. A very important aspect and limitation of these gray infrastructures is that they completely ignore residual risk from levee failure, and we know it can happen. And we know we don't understand the residual risk really well because of all these climate projections. And finally, the lack of flexibility to uncertainties of climate change projections. So they are projecting these walls based on data for sea level rise to 2080, and they're adding 100-year dynamic flood. But we know that our understanding of climate is still very dynamic, and that not only that, but the human relationship with the landscape is also very dynamic. And we need to embed this dynamic in the policies. It's really hard and not easy to do with gray infrastructure. So, this is, again, kind of the project for SFO. They're focusing on these measures that are isolating and looking at the perimeter of the airport, making sure the airport perimeter is protected. But we want to also expand the understanding of impacts of climate into non-structural measures. And I'm going to show you some examples of how we can expand the understanding of impacts into these network dimensions and propose different policies that are going beyond this single asset focus of adaptation measures. And this is one of the works I've been working with the university and the transportation policy people in California. We're just trying to think here how each airport, which are these blue dots here, the ones that are exposed to sea level rise in California, how they participate in the interregional multimodal corridors for the transportations of goods and people, And in case they are impacted, how would that actually transfer impact or risk to the rest of the corridors at a regional scale? And to do that, we just, understand a little bit of the topology. And we actually, this is a very simple exercise, but it's good to give you an idea. We look at the percentage of airport area exposed per corridor. And we can see that we have, these are the most exposed corridors through the end of the century. And we know that these corridors are not directly exposed, but they will probably suffer some sort of disruption because they heavily rely on the corridors that have airports that are the most exposed in the Bay Area. So this is just a way of looking into this and understanding how risk can be systemic and can transfer through not only airports, but other types of transportations, because these infrastructures are interconnected and we depend on them for many things. And another example is looking at, and this is something other people have talked about too, is looking at how we can think of these infrastructure systems as social assets or organizational networks. So we talk a lot about who are the stakeholders, how are they making decisions to adapt, how are they making decisions to manage adaptation. And we want to make sure that we not only have the list of these stakeholders, but we want to make sure that we understand how they're interconnected in different ways. And once we understand that, once we understand these networks of stakeholders and policy stakeholders responsible for designing and implementing climate adaptation standards at airports and other services, we can actually empower some stakeholders that are a little bit in the periphery that should have more sway in decision making. And we can also enhance these networks to raise awareness and share resources, mainstream climate science, and these alternative adaptation pathways into technical procedures, but also into organizational culture and institutional values. So just to reiterate, we need to integrate disaster risk reduction to climate adaptation, because we're going to feel this not only gradually, but in abrupt ways. And that's very important that these two are integrated. And the second one, we want to understand these infrastructure systems and think about them as interconnected technologies, but also social and environmental systems, so that we can better integrate the landscape scales into adaptation measures, also better understand cascading impact, and better integrate these network dimensions that are inherent to cities. And I think that's some of the examples, and that's it for the presentation. Thank you. Obrigada.
Sara, muito obrigada. Agora podemos dar sequência para a próxima fala. Last but not least, Professor Alan Platos, da Yale University. Professor Platos vai estar comentando com a gente, discutindo como projetar comunidades resilientes às mudanças climáticas, frente a alguns estudos de caso americanos que já estão...
Good morning to friends and colleagues in Recife, and good afternoon to friends and colleagues in the Netherlands. And thank you for the opportunity to share some of our work and ideas, and to make a contribution to this critically or urgent conversation. I am truly inspired by cities like Recife around the world now, who are actively taking the lead in this conversation and in this work. And with all due respect to the United Nations, what is clearly emerging is a League of United Cities, and we're proud to be part of this discussion. Well, I will use a few of our recent projects at the Yale Urban Design Workshop a community design center based at the Yale School of Architecture, as well as the student work from a recent Yale studio to illustrate a few of the key working principles that have emerged from our exploration of coastal adaptation strategies. This work is, by its nature, as you know, totally collaborative and community-based. And I would like to acknowledge my colleagues and students at Yale, at other institutions and professional firms in various levels of local, state, and federal government, and most importantly, the citizens and stakeholders in the communities where we have worked, who live every day with the challenges we're discussing. And as well, I'm really happy to follow Sarah, who gave an excellent characterization of precisely the old approach to infrastructure that we too see our work as in part reacting against. Well, it's not changing, Mila.
Let me
And
see.
you change it.
I can. Let me see.
If you double click the presentation, maybe it works.
Sorry. What were you suggesting?
To double click the presentation to try to get it back.
A brilliant idea. We could be forgiven if, as designers, researchers, and citizens, we react to the magnitude of the challenges posed by climate change, storm events of unprecedented ferocity and frequency, both catastrophic and chronic levels of risk to the most vulnerable populations on a global scale. And as well as Sarah has pointed out, to critical infrastructure, which is so heavily concentrated in our coastal areas. The sort of challenges that Timothy Morton has called hyper objects to dramatize their complexity and reach. We could be forgiven if we tend to propose solutions on an equally gargantuan scale. Not that ambitious protective infrastructure will be an unnecessary part of our ongoing response, but for most communities around the world, traditional engineering fixes in the form of gray, poured in place and heroic structure will need to be supplemented and in many cases preceded by responses that are more local, more comprehensible, more adaptive, dynamic, and interactive, not to mention far less expensive, that include both short-term and longer-term measures, including, importantly, massive changes in how we live and interact with water and our whole ecosystem. So when we were part of a multidisciplinary team working with a quite challenged post-industrial waterfront neighborhood in Bridgeport, Connecticut, to decide how best to deploy the resources from the smallest grant, from HUD's and Hank's Rebuild by Design program, to begin the enormous job of adapting their streets, buildings, and public spaces to chronic flooding. Our ambitions and research were expansive and our scale of intervention very local. This work, in fact, exemplified the imperative when working with communities facing multiple challenges of structural inequality and neglect, limited access to economic opportunity, healthcare, open space, and political power, to use any substantial infusion of resources to also rebuild and protect housing, the local economy, and importantly, cultural heritage and identity. So the core of this plan that emerged from a long process of sharing knowledge, debate, and collaboration was a new system of blue-green streets, public open space, that linked a redeveloped public housing site with a local university campus, and ultimately to Olmsted's only oceanfront public park, while managing stormwater in an incremental and highly visible way at scales ranging from roofs and backyards to streets and parks to the urban and regional watershed. Obviously, this sort of project cannot be undertaken, much less sustained, without the participation and ultimately the ownership by an engaged local community. In reality, in vulnerable communities that have been otherwise marginalized and excluded, work of this kind is also always about community organizing and building the social and spatial fabric of a damaged neighborhood. Well, I've already alluded to what we think is the single most important principle in the work of building resilient, climate responsive communities. That is making sure that every project, in fact, every building and public investment, be designed to both perform and to represent as many aspects of the larger project of community building as possible. Now, as you heard from Sarah, everything about the official way in which traditional infrastructure projects are framed, carried out, and evaluated usually runs counter to this imperative. Think of building a conventional highway or drainage system, and you'll visualize a monofunctional, unembellished, or actively ugly engineering project designed to perform one and only one job in a way that often becomes obstructive of other community needs and goals. In Bridgeport, and even more explicitly in our study of an old shipbuilding area of Gothenburg, Sweden, the need for coastal adaptation and blue-green ecosystem-based infrastructure became the occasion for a new local public space network that served a greater diversity of productive uses while protecting and celebrating the history and culture of a distinctive local place. Gothenburg has been Sweden's main industrial city and port to the west. And by the way, has a early 17th century Dutch plan core around historic canals that is exactly contemporary with the Dutch plan of the core of Recife. And the riverfront site of Lindholmen, where we work, is a big part of that story. Reinvented after the complete loss of shipbuilding as a science park, Lindholmen is now in the process of evolving into a more mixed-use urban district and needs to be more fully connected by public space and infrastructure, both internally and to the city and region, while also respecting and adapting its central riverfront location. Our study focused on the distinctive configuration of the shoreline interface created to serve large-scale industrial use and adapting that historic pattern for contemporary public access and use, while both conserving and naturalizing the hard artificial line of the old land-water edge to be part of a new system of nature-based protection and redevelopment. This approach was further explored just last winter by a team of Yale students working in collaboration with students from 5 other Atlantic coast universities on the historic and highly vulnerable and exposed island of Nantucket. The projects explored fairly radical long-term combinations of ecosystem-based adaptation protection, and even retreat in this case. In the case of this project on the Brand Point Peninsula, naturally low-lying area, beach and dunes and wetlands beneath the bluff of the terminal glacial moraine. The project was tied to the creation of a community based more on ocean aquaculture and food production than currently on tourism and multi-million-dollar holiday homes. And in the case of the historic town center and its critical waterfront infrastructure, a project that attempted to balance development conservation of the historic waterfront, where the American whaling industry was once centered, and to nudge it towards the transition to clean energy and mobility. To conclude, this project in particular exemplifies the three pillars of real resilience and sustainability. Yes, environmental resilience, as we all know, but it's crucial to tie that at every point to socioeconomic resilience and sustainability. And in the end, I would submit that without the point of cultural sustainability, preservation and adaptation of heritage and community identity, neither of the other two will work for long. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, professor Platos. Devido ao avançar da hora, acredito que posso fazer alguma colocação um pouco geral sobre esse primeiro momento, iniciado pela professora Lúcia Veras, e na sequência com Marcos, Sara e agora o professor Platos. Só para a gente ter algumas provocações iniciais, antes de passar para o segundo bloco, conduzido por Jean Paul, e em seguida teremos a mesa redonda. Bom, talvez nesse primeiro momento alguns pontos fiquem um pouco claros. O primeiro deles é que a paisagem é mutável, desde a sua origem, então, consequentemente, é uma constante, até o que se projeta ao futuro. Então, a premissa de estabilidade também se coloca em xeque, isso para todos os campos. O Recife, consequentemente, é um retrato dessa paisagem das Américas, uma paisagem complexa, que precisa assumir essa complexidade, onde esse eixo precisa ser considerado como diretriz fundamental para que possamos pensar o que é esse Recife que precisamos. Bom, articulando com as palestras em sequência, elas são muito complementares. Quando Marcos inicia colocando Recife como uma cidade aquática anfíbia, isso está altamente associado com o que a ONU nos coloca, que é o desafio atual da década dos oceanos. Ou seja, existe essa linha de frente, esse fio condutor, que nos coloca diante de grandes desafios compartilhados, tanto Recife, quanto os Países Baixos e em outras cidades do planeta. Sara complementa esse raciocínio, trazendo um pouco da relação da integração de sistemas urbanos, ou seja, lógicas que não podem ser mais vistas de maneira fragmentada, infraestruturas muito mais em redes, sejam elas estruturas físicas ou não físicas, e quando Sara coloca possíveis intervenções em San Francisco Bay Area, muitas dessas infraestruturas são cinzas, puramente técnicas ou tecnocratas. E é muito claro que isso não funciona, especialmente se a gente aplica diretamente para um caso do Recife. Então, as soluções são muito mais pautadas numa green infrastructure, numa infraestrutura verde e azul, integradas em si, para que a gente possa pensar muito mais do que uma linha de contenção, puramente técnica, mas pensar em um sistema integrado, em um ecossistema socioambiental. Mais adiante, quando o professor Platos coloca a reflexão de Martin dos hiperobjetos, isso é basicamente a noção de mudanças climáticas, que é um hiperobjeto onde nós não temos a dimensão, não dá para ter a dimensão do todo, é muito difícil ter essa dimensão. Nós só temos alguns efeitos localizados, nós vimos alguns efeitos dos fenômenos, como ela se manifesta, e temos que nos articular com eles, tentar minimizar esses impactos. E existe uma constante, hoje, que ele coloca, que é o design by nature, ou seja, a natureza, que já é esse design de 3,8 bilhões de anos de existência, um sistema que constantemente se aperfeiçoa, ele precisa ser novamente considerado no centro dessas discussões. Quando a gente vai pensar em intervenções dessa natureza, não é uma solução A, B ou C, mas sim um conjunto, multi-layers, integradas, articuladas e articuladoras, com estratégias de adaptação, resilientes, enfim, por assim integradas, os sistemas azuis e verdes. E, bom, apenas para provocar esse debate, o que fica muito claro que é colocado aqui é que a gente tem digamos, um modelo do antropoceno que está cada vez mais falho, do homem como centro de tudo, e se provocativamente a gente pode dizer que existe uma revolução ecossistêmica acontecendo, talvez estejamos hoje todos reunidos para testemunhar um novo momento, um novo paradigma histórico, que é onde se abre o ecoceno, onde os sistemas estão muito mais distribuídos em rede, e nós precisamos incorporar, sim, a visão futura do Recife e de todo o planeta como essa grande rede integrada, como esse sistema global. Dito isso, passo a palavra para Jean-Paul Corten, para conduzir nosso segundo bloco de adaptação e proteção. Ao final, eu gostaria que, se possível, Jean-Paul fizesse algumas considerações sobre as falas, sobre a perspectiva holandesa também, sobre essa questão, e podemos finalizar com um debate coletivo do Brasil e da Holanda. Jean-Paul, a fala é sua.
Thank you, Mila, and also thank you for all the speakers before. I think that was a very interesting view from your side of the ocean. Now let's move to our side of the ocean, where the challenges are actually quite comparable, or maybe we should say the same. Yet the conditions are different. So that makes it interesting to compare. So we also prepared three lectures on our side. And first of all, I would like to ask Menekosian to share his screen and start his speech. Mene,
thank you.
The floor is yours.
I'll start sharing. Share. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Well, I will take a more historical view than a designer or a modern environmental or oceanographic view, although they are very important as well. But I think we can learn a lot from the historical situations. A short overview, few words on cities of the world and the original defenses against water. And water is coming from all sides. It's not only coming from the sea. So we have to protect ourselves and our cities against the water. And we can also protect us from the water with the water. And we can protect us with the heritage we have left behind from previous protection systems. Sorry. Here. All the cities in the world are basically closely related to water. All cities evolved next to big bodies of water, whether it is sea or a major river. They all have a direct link and a direct relation with the water. That also means that from the start of urbanization, all these cities had to react if the situations in the water, in water management, in the nature of water in climate changed, they had to adapt to that. So that we still have as many cities as we have means that they are historically adaptive. They are resilient against past changes. And a lot of cities have disappeared. Take, for instance, the famous city of Troy, or the city of Miletus in modern-day Turkey. They have completely collapsed because they lost their relationship with water and they couldn't adapt to their changing situation. So they disappeared. Modern cities have, therefore, if they have a historical core, some kind of adaptation strategy inherent in their urbanism. If we look at the Dutch situation, we are in the delta. The biggest rivers of Northwestern Europe are all watering out in sea, and we have a very simple defense against sea. If you look here at this map, you see this yellow line between land and sea. These are dunes and sands, beaches, and you can see the Dutch coast is divided in three parts. We have an open delta with inland ports. We have a closed and dangerous coast with high dunes, and it's dangerous for shipping. So all the dunes are meant to keep the water out, so there are no cities with a direct opening to sea, no historical cities. And then you have the northern part with an open sheltered coast with the dunes arranged in a string of islands, after which you can relatively safely sail and navigate. So if we look at the cities in Holland, in the north you see the cities, do I have a cursor? No. In the north you see the cities more to the coast. In the center you see the great inland sea of the former Zuiderzee, where the cities tend to be around that inland sea, not directly on the North Sea. And in the southwest you can see the cities sheltered on the islands. This situation was very normal for the Dutch when they started to discover the world. And you see that a lot of cities that have Dutch origins are in the same types of landscape. You can see here a profile of the Dutch landscape. You see the sea, then you see a high wall of dunes, sand dunes, then the cities. And you can see in Pulicat in India, a same kind of situation. You have this sandbar with a sheltered bay, a safe haven, a safe harboring space, and after that, the city itself. The same you can see at Recife. It's a situation that was very normal and very common for the Dutch, and therefore they tended to go to places like that to create their new cities. Another interesting thing is that the cities all have a close relation with the water, and they are behind some kind of sheltered coast, and the city center is always on the relatively highest point in the environment. So they are working with the landscape. You can see here the city of Amersfoort in the river system of the Eem River. The yellow area is higher ground. You can see here the city of Semarang in Java, the Dutch fortified city, and the main square is on a higher area near the river. And even in Recife, you can see here the palace area where you have a high point on the island and a sheltered coastline. We are all living in a delta. Here you have the Netherlands and here you have Recife, you can see the same kind of situation, mountainous hinterland and a lot of rivers flowing into sea. This is not only a threat to those cities in those low-lying deltas, it's also a blessing, because the normal situation means that these rivers also transport a lot of sediments that not only makes the delta a very rich soil for agriculture, but also gives some kind of natural protection against the sea with sandbanks, sand dunes, and all kinds of slow sloping coastal areas to keep the waters more or less in control. The problem with the deltas is also that if you have, for instance, a rising sea level, that the amount of water that, or the speed of which the water from the rivers is flowing to sea decreases enormously. Therefore, a lot of the sedimentation, the normal processes that protect the land from the sea, is left behind, and there's less sedimentation, more sedimentation upstream. So you have a problem with blocking in the rivers, and less sedimentation is reaching the sea. And therefore, you don't have the natural protection that the sedimentation gives. Normally, in the traditional way, the Dutch thought mainly about the rivers as transporting water to sea as fast as possible, not threatening the land. And you can see here a flood of 1916 in the center of the Netherlands. You can see here the inland sea, the Zuiderzee, in orange, the flooded areas of 1916, and even a city like Amersfoort, that is relatively inland in the center of the Netherlands, was flooded by this storm. So it was really from sea into land. When the Dutch reacted to that on their traditional way by building dikes. And you have here the first plan that they thought of closing the whole Wadden Sea, so the whole island area, the northern protective island area, closing it off completely from sea by dikes and making land from all the water in between. And that plan was eventually altered into just one dam closing off the inland sea and making land from parts of the inland sea, and that is more or less the current situation. This is a very traditional Dutch way of thinking, building dams, dikes against the sea, not working with the sea, but winning land from the sea. In 1953, we had another major flood, now mainly targeting the southwestern regions of the land. You can see here the province of Zeeland. All the dark green areas were flooded in 1953. And it was considered a major catastrophe, internationally acclaimed catastrophe. And that responded in the same way by building dams, blocking out all the seaways and sea passages. This is one of these dams, the Oosterscheldekering, now considered one of the modern wonders of the world, as a symbol on how the Dutch won from the sea. But this is a very temporary solution. This is economically very, very, very expensive. It costs a lot to maintain. And it is not adaptive anymore. You have made into concrete something that is there for one and one solution only. So we started to enlarge the land that what we lost in the natural sedimentation of the rivers, we can do manually by adding sand to the beaches, adding sand to the dune line, and therefore creating man-made sea defenses. We do the same all over the world. We have here the Palm Island construction in Dubai, also manufactured by the Dutch companies specialized in these kind of sea defenses. You can see it is kind of working, and it is some kind of adaptive because you work more or less with the sea, but it is something you have to maintain constantly. You can do that in a different way also. You can see here, the southwest of the Netherlands, there is this huge sandbank created. And this is maintained as a huge sandbank that the sea itself can erode this and transport the sand all along the Dutch coast and reinforce the coast in a more natural way as it has been done in the past. So this is a modern engineering solution that is looking to natural and historical coastal defenses and inventing something new on basis of the knowledge of history and nature. And this is a much more sustainable system because here you can work with the power of the water, here you can work with the threats of the sea in order to create, let the sea create its own sea defenses. On the cultural side, a lot of the cities, I said, always have adapted to water, but there are all kinds of edifices built, and you have the military, you're in Recife, you have the great forts and whatever. Here in the city of Zutphen, you have the same kind of military defense of the city. And these defense works can also be used as defense works against the water. Here, in this case, against the River IJssel, that is threatening the lower city center with higher water levels. And in Zutphen, they have adapted these historical buildings into the planning of the modern river defenses. So instead of building a huge dike or a levee blocking off the city from the water, they have incorporated the existing historical, in this case, military infrastructure, in order to rebuild that against as infrastructure against rising water levels. In this way, you can adapt the cultural heritage in cities for a new goal, for a new purpose, and that is against, it's for water defenses. So not only the cities are adaptive, but the cultural heritage in it is also adaptive. Otherwise, we would have lost it long ago. That means that you not only have to think about cultural heritage in different ways, but you also have to look in a broader way to cities. It's not just stopping at the boundaries of the city. You have to use nature around it in a very large scale, and you can use the systems that were in place. You can use them again or learn from their historical use. Thank you.
Thank you, Menne. I think that was a very interesting contribution. If I understand right, can I say that we should rather work with than against the water? Is that your message?
We should work with the water, and we should work in accordance to the whole system. So the both natural, historical, and ecological systems that are there. You have to look in a more holistic way than just from a design solution, just from a water management solution, or just from a heritage preservation solution.
Thank you. I think that is a clear statement. Very nice. I would like to take the opportunity, be it only for 2 minutes, to leave room for one question or remark or reflection on what we just heard. Who can I give the floor? Please raise your hands. I'm not sure if I can see all the participants. Is there anyone who would like to contradict what is said, or who might like to add something to what has just been said, or maybe have a question? Feel free.
So I'm checking the YouTube right now, Jean-Paul, and mainly both channels are saying that just acknowledging the event and congratulating the whole team, and they are really impressed of the whole lectures, let's say. I think that we are still digesting, let's say.
Still digesting. Okay. In that case, I suggest we move on, and then I would like to give the floor to Edwin van Zon. Edwin is working at the municipality of Dordrecht, and as an urbanist, and is mainly involved in the developments of the inner city. Edwin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. It was very inspiring to see that everybody all over the world is working on the same problems with an overlapping solution, with some specific details from each unique position. I will tell you something about the Dordrecht situation. Dordrecht is located and this position in the Netherlands. Menno already explained something about the Dutch situation. We are here. This is the North Sea, and here are the rivers, the Rhine and the Maas. Also, Dordrecht is below sea level, and we are protected by the dunes over here, and the infrastructure in Zeeland and Rotterdam. As you can see, Dordrecht is actually an island surrounded by big rivers. And it is quite unique because when we are on the island, our city government can take measures that really influence the city as a total. It's a very old city. We are living 800 years with water and not against water. That's I think that's a very good message because you can learn a lot from looking at things that happened in the past. 100 years ago, we had a tidal difference of several meters in our city. So people were really living with that situation, and they had to cope with a different situation. Here you can see our inner city surrounded by the big rivers. And the water has a very high quality in a day-to-day life. A lot of tourists come to Dordrecht because of these pictures. And we explore this water by a lot of activities on the water. So it's very beautiful. This is the other part of Dordrecht, the national park. It's a specific kind of birds. A very nice ecological system. But the water is also dangerous. One of the biggest floods for Dordrecht was the flood, St. Elizabeth flood in 1421, when several villages on the island disappeared and were drowned by the flooding. And this was the situation of Dordrecht after the St. Elizabeth flood. Only our historic city was left and all the island was disappeared. So we had to build it again by making new dikes. And every time layer had to build their new dike. So we have a very specific situation. a large part of our city is inside the dikes and protected by the dikes, but also parts on the island are outside the dikes, and they are a little bit higher because they were made by the tidal difference from the rivers. This is a situation in 1953. Menno also explained something about it. And this is a situation that happens in Dordrecht, well, every 3 to 5 years. Every 3 to 5 years, there's a high water situation, and houses are flooded, quays are flooded, cellars are flooded. So we have to cope with this and have to deal with this situation. This is the position of Dordrecht. It's most dangerous when there's a high water situation on the rivers and there's a storm at sea. Both will come together at Dordrecht. But because we are not at the beginning of this system, but rather at the end, we see the water coming. So we have a little time to prepare at this high water situation. That's why we made a multi-layer strategy in most of 3 layers. The first layer is to protect our island by building strong dikes, of course, because the biggest part of our island is below sea level. But the second layer is to make adaptation in urban development, make good infrastructure, protect the critical infrastructure like the water facilities and electricity. And in the third layer, if something really happens and goes wrong, we have a good strategy for evacuation and crisis plans. So that's very important. These all 3 layers work together in the solution for Dordrecht. Before we actually could design with water, we have to really understand what is the impact of flooding, and we made different scenarios with different impacts. What happens if a dike breaches or if a river is flooded. Also, we are learning a lot of from examples from the past. You can see elevated floor levels. They already did it in 1600. They made floating cellars, so that there was no problem if it flooded. We have to protect our electricity and make it high enough when the quays are flooded. And most of the buildings in our inner city have waterproof facades. That examples we translated into the future. This is an example of an urban area that's outside the dikes. There's a lot of big tidal difference in this area, and we build houses on piles. Very high quality on a day-to-day basis. Their environment changes every day because they're still here. Also, there's a tidal difference, but the ground level of living is very high and protected by high water levels. We also make new urban public space that can be flooded. And why do we do it? Like parks and places, to make people aware of the situation that they are living in an environment that can be flooded. People have to be aware of the risk of flooding. We also made several houses, floating houses, a floating hotel, also to help people understand in what area they are living. One of the things we as municipality do a lot is communication. Every time there's a high water situation, we have a big communication plan and tell the inhabitants what to do if there's a risk for high water, because they have to know themselves what they can do. They have to, they can get information what to do from the municipality, but they also can escape to higher grounds in their own house. Well, that was the background from the design shop, the design workshop we did in the International Architectural Biennale of Rotterdam. As a municipality, we have to build 10,000 houses on our island, but we want to combine it with water safety plans. So every development on our island has to contribute and to make a contribution to the water safety of our island. What did we do? This is the area outside the dikes, and it's on high ground because of the tidal difference. And this is most of the inhabitants live here below sea level. We have to build 7,000 houses in this area, and that development should contribute to the safety of this whole island over here. So the area, the start, has to be a safe haven for the city. In a workshop, we give assignments to several bureaus, several offices, and they all get an assignment to make some designs for this area to start over here. We use water safety as a leverage. So every plan has to make a contribution to the water safety of Dordrecht as a total. You've seen this before, the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. We also use them in this workshop because it really helped us to integrate the design process. Not just only one factor of the question, and not just only a housing problem, but they have to look at all 17 goals from the United Nations. And that really helped because it wasn't presented at the end, but at the beginning. So at the beginning of the process, they really had to rethink all the development goals. One of the conclusions was that infrastructure was really critical. When you build a safe haven over here, you have to have safe infrastructure to get there. So Venhoeven CS made a proposal for a new high line in the city that has a very high quality on a day-to-day basis. It's a very unique recreation route through the city and through the parks, but also a very safe route when there's a high water situation. Because of the high position, it is an evacuation route to the safe haven outside our city. How does it work? You can see it over here. And this is a day-to-day basis. A very nice recreation route. And this is the situation where there's a high water risk. You can see the models. When it's flooded, it's very good to have an escape route over here to the start as a safe haven. We had to work on different scales. This was one of the examples for infrastructure. This is the second one. It's on the scale of a building. AEM architects made a solution over here next to the water that can is a temporary refuge for evacuees during an emergency situation. In a day-to-day basis, it's a very nice building that combines working and living in this area. They made a rather large building that's self-sustainable. And there's also a food production, there's recreation, there are commercial activities, and different kind of living spaces. You can see some examples. And this is the model. And in the first 3 levels here, you can work. There are commercial activities. You can have a food market over there. And at the top floors, there are the living spaces. But in times of an emergency, they should help to get lots of evacuees to this building. And that shared space is turned into a shelter. And they can get 5,000 people to find shelter in this building over here. So we're building not only for a day-to-day quality, mixed-use building, but in a flood situation, it also has to provide in shelter for evacuees from other parts of the city. You can see the example. A bigger area over here is in our drink water facility, a big water area over here. We're building a floating city. And the floating city has to be self-sufficient as well. And they also have to provide evacuees in a case of flooding. How do they do it? A whole infrastructure that is flooded, that's floating on the water on the river. They're building houses, but also community buildings. You can see examples of the structure of the building. It's 3 3 to 5 stores high, and it, well, something about 5,000 inhabitants can live over here. And this is the most important one because they are building community hubs, and these community hubs are also can be used to for the evacuations from other parts of the city. You can see the example of the model. This is one of the last examples. We had to build a lot of houses in this area. And we look at here at the double row of the public space, because when there's a flood situation, it's very hard to get there. You have to get there by boat. The army has to get there. All the people that provide help has to get there. So the public space has a double function in this model. When it's been flooded, you can start the first 3 to 5 days. Evacuees can stay here, but later on they have to depart to other more safe parts of the country. At the same time, you have to deliver goods, water, food over here. So this public space has a double role in a day-to-day quality, but also can be used for very good transportation to other parts of the country. So what are the lessons we learned by doing this workshop? It's very good to do research by design. We use water safety as a leverage, and by doing this with several offices, really a lot of opportunities suddenly arise. By using the international goals, work are very integral. An integrated approach is very good. That make very strong solutions. We use water safety as a leverage. It's also said there's a calls on a very high focus on public space. The blue-green structure is very good, and the infrastructure. So you have to create a very strong framework. And one of the most important is to create partnerships. You can do this you can't do this alone as a municipality, but you have to work together with all different kinds of authorities. And we're working very close to the water board, to the province, to the state forest management. And if you know and understand each other's goals and objectives, you can combine these goals and make a very good project, and use the same kind of money to get a far bigger result. So there are some lessons we learned by doing this project.
Thank you, Edwin.
Don't know if how to stop my sharing, but
yes, you managed. Okay, thank you, Edwin. That was very interesting. So, if I understand well, everything's under control in Dordrecht. No problems. Everything's solved. Everything's solved.
Not everything is under control because we have still a part outside the dikes, a very large historical part. It's outside the dikes, but I think something about 10,000 monuments. And we are rethinking how to protect them, because every 3 to 5 years there's a high water situation and the quays are flooded, and some of the houses are flooded. And how do we protect this specific kind of area inside our municipality? I think we have a rather good plan for all other different parts in our municipality, but this is a very unique situation when we have no dikes to protect this part. And it's not very flexible, because you cannot change a lot of things in this part of the century that's already there for 800 years.
Yeah, so there is still a big issue.
Yeah, there's still a big issue.
Yeah. Okay. Although we are running a bit out of time, I would like to give the possibility for a reflection or a remark for no more than 2 minutes. So if there is someone who really wants to share something or ask something, please feel free. And then please raise your hand or unmute yourself if that is, I think that should be possible. If not, then maybe it needs some time to. Frank, do you have a question or remark to make? You are muted, I think, Frank. I don't know how to unmute you. Oh.
Maybe you can ask something in the chat. I will come to it later.
Is it possible to unmute Frank?
He's unmuted.
He is unmuted. Okay. Frank, could you try again? Or could you put your question or remark in the chat maybe, Frank? Okay. Well, maybe we can come back to you, Frank, later. I suggest now, for time reason, that we move to the next lecture. Edwin, thank you very much. It was a very intriguing story, and I think very useful for the case of Recife. Oh, wait, now I see something in the chat. That is Sayib Mahanta telling that was a really informative presentation. It talked more about adapting to climate change. But when we talk about mitigation strategies for developing countries, I would like to know your view as part of a municipality. How can social protection on the vulnerable can be combined with forecast-based modeling to optimize anticipatory relief? Thanks. Edwin, could you react to this?
No, I don't think I have a very small answer to this. I will answer in the chat. Let me rethink it a little bit.
Okay, please. Then meanwhile, I suggest we move to Jan Maarten. Jan Maarten, please, can I give you the floor? Jan Maarten is an urbanist, graduated at Delft University of Technology, and currently is working at Bureau de Zwarte Hond. Perro Negro, yes. I think that would be in Portuguese.
The black dog, as we are called. Can you all see my screen at the moment? Full screen and blue slide?
Yes, we can.
Very good. Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to share our work, how we work as a design firm at the Zwarte Hond on climate adaptation as a catalyst for urban quality. My name is Jan Maarten van Hemert. I'm an urbanist at the Zwarte Hond, and I'll talk you quickly through several principles on how we use climate adaptation to improve urban quality. I hope I have something new to add, because almost everyone before me touched upon the topic that I want to share with you today. And I fully agree with the earlier statements to use natural design, to use integrated solutions, and I will definitely touch upon that in my presentation. I will tell you a bit on how we act on climate adaptation in urban environments on the case of Zwolle, the region of Zwolle, and a little bit on the case of Rotterdam as a city. But the main part will be the region of Zwolle, which is in the north of the Netherlands and which is described by many as Nederland met klein, which means like a small version representing the Netherlands. it's a region, with one of the main cities of the Netherlands, which is Zwolle, which also is very much a historical part. And Zwolle, with its surrounding landscape, is in a delta area next to the river IJssel, in here, and the river Vecht. And then on the west side, the IJsselmeer, which is a lake the Netherlands created in the 1930s, 1930s, with the new land Flevopolder in front of it. Historically, Zwolle was part of the Hanse alliance, and it used the water mainly as a trade, for trading, which means that, as we have seen earlier, the city has developed with water as a friend. It relied on water for its trade, for its economic growth, and without the water, the city would not have existed. But at the same time, water was also something that caused danger, as something that they still strive against. Because Zwolle is between the rivers and the lake and some smaller springs, it's also on the position of a bottleneck, where the red area here represents Zwolle. And as we've seen earlier by, as Edwin explained, it can be stuck within a northwestern storm, where we have high sea levels from the IJsselmeer, with a lot of, in combination with a high water level in the rivers IJssel and Vecht, and local rainfall from the heuvel, from the hills nearby, which lead through the city. It has Zwolle acting as a bottleneck. And at the same time, Zwolle faces many urban challenges. Commonly in Western Europe, there's challenging for housing, there's challenging for mobility, for economic and industrial areas. But at the same time, there's also these water-related challenges. Not only flood safety, but also how to deal with extreme local rainfall, but also even in the Netherlands, with heat stress, with drought, not only on a local level, but also on a regional level. And one of the main questions for the area of Zwolle is how to combine these challenges and how to accommodate growth in a sustainable manner. As the Zwarte Hond, we are asked to design multiple scenarios for this area, and in the end, combine the best elements of these scenarios for one vision. So that's what we call, if I take one step into design methodology, that's what we call research by design. We design multiple scenarios to determine the best strategy for the region. And here we made 4 scenarios, which I will only explain how they are organized, based on 2 axes. On the horizontal axis, we organized scenarios based on their solutions to be local, to be reactive, to react to symptoms, and to keep them as clear and simple as possible. On the right side of the matrix, there are the regional solutions. They tend to be more complex, but they also tend to address problems, as we call it in Dutch, at the root of the problem. And on the vertical axis, we play with how urbanization relates to the water and to the natural elements. We designed 2 scenarios in which not the urbanization is leading, but where the water or the natural elements are in charge, and the urbanization is following. And on the other side of the matrix, we say no, urbanization is leading, and we will redirect the water with technical and single-based solutions. We have designed these scenarios, researched them, analyzed them, and so far we have a few lessons learned, which I will share with you. Of which the first lesson is, think in the system and act locally. When designing for a city or a specific location, always think how its context is in the bigger water system. In this case, when we are designing for the city of Zwolle, we can propose design interventions over there. We can act while we are part of a bigger system of rivers, of springs, and of a lake. So we constantly ask ourselves how can we act to contribute to the bigger system. The second one is mentioned earlier. It shows an evolution in Dutch thinking, and it's where we have learned as a lesson that natural solutions are preferred over technical ones because they're more resilient. And they allow us to move along with the water rather than what we are actually famous for as the Dutch, to provide a rock-solid defense against water. So prefer the natural ones. The third lesson that we've learned is to seek for a multiplier effect in the combinations rather than a single technical one. This is a picture from Rotterdam where a single plan, it's called a single, a natural canal in the city, which is actually a plan from the late 1800s, where water solutions are combined with a park-like atmosphere where people can meet, but they can also move, and which also creates an ecological belt in the city of Rotterdam. It's where we combined water with nature, but also place for humanity, for urbanization, instead of keeping the water out with a technical solution. At the time, at the late 1800s, this plan was introduced to also provide the city with cleaner water to end a cholera pandemic. So it's kind of ironic that we're now in a similar global condition where water can be used as an ally instead of as an enemy. It's also related to the speakers addressed yesterday. A fourth lesson that we've learned is to hold on to raindrops as high as possible, as long as possible, and to release slowly and carefully. As the Dutch, we have created a system over the past decades where we wanted to get rid of water as soon as possible with these technical solutions, and now we're facing drought, but also we don't know how to store it and release it at a convenient time. In the case of acting locally and thinking in the system, we provide or we propose two actions. It's to store the water in high ground, so to use landscape architectural interventions to keep the water longer on high areas, and also to buffer them more in the city, to use the city as a sponge to prevent unwanted high water levels at the places where we cannot have them. To use the city as a sponge is a concept that we have explored in the city of Rotterdam during the Architectural Biennale. This is an explorative design where we want to inspire how a city could look like when you start to treat it as natural as possible, to add as much green as you can, and to add as much elements that can store water in wet days, which can be released in dry days. one very important thing that we discovered is that the city gets friendlier, gets to be a more pleasant area to live in, and that it also has a very healthy and happy effect on its citizens. So a city that is completely designed for climate adaptation does not necessarily has to be a doom scenario, but it can be a very happy and pretty and healthy scenario. The sixth one is also addressed by Edwin in this lecture, is how new projects can be developed to help others adapt to the climate. We call this the Zwolle staircase for urbanization, and it is a measure where each project, each local intervention can be tested on its merits to the bigger system. So when you are developing a new project, and we believe it should help its context to adapt to the climate. And when you pass that test, you can help others adapting. That's where, as a whole community, we can help each other improve to climate adaptation. So to paraphrase former President of the United States, former President Kennedy, don't ask what the region or the city or the country can do for you or your project, but ask yourself as a designer, as a developer, as a scientist, or as a citizen, how your intervention, how your project can contribute to climate change for the region or your city or your country. So use this challenge. Use this challenge as an opportunity to improve urban quality. And we very much hoped to have inspired you to create cities not only resilient to flood risk, but very much also to see them as public spaces where people can meet in a happy environment, contribute to a healthier lifestyle, and to see climate adaptation as an integrated and natural solution to make happier and healthier cities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jan Maarten. That was quite intriguing, very interesting. So, Jan Maarten, if I understand right, the more water we have, the happier we are. Is that correct?
We should see water as an ally. It can help us in hotter days, in dry days, and we should welcome as much as green combined with blue in our cities as possible.
Okay,
in a natural solution, I should.
Yeah, that's right. Could you also think in the same way if it comes to sea water, or would that be different?
I think that this should be very much possible, although I think it should be very much possible. In the city of Rotterdam, many tidal parks are created to create a more gradient transition between land and water. And it should very much be possible, although one should be very careful with the drinking water supply, which is in the case of Zwolle, there's opportunities to combine one another. And I can imagine in Recife that the storage of drinking water and the access to drinking water, especially for the for areas that are more in need of that, one could think of green solutions to, especially for river water, to store it and to use it as drinking water before reverting it to sea.
So it has to do with safeguarding your infrastructure, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Well, although we are running out of time, still I would also give the opportunity here, be it for a few minutes, for any question, remark, or review, if there is anyone. Maybe also this is a story that should first be digested. I can quite imagine when we have time for that. In that case, I hand over the floor back to Mila.
Obrigada, Jean Paul. Será que é o caso da gente responder outras duas perguntas que estão aqui no chat? Tanto a do Sajib quanto a do Frank, antes da gente prosseguir?
Yes, okay, you're right. So there is actually, these are mainly questions to Edwin. Edwin, did you see the questions in the chat? And would you be able to reflect to them?
Yes, I'm busy answering some of the questions in the chat.
Then maybe we pass to Mr. Platters. There's a question, and the question is as follows. I will read. Considering your discussion about the community participation in projects regarding climate change and rising sea levels, how could this interaction happen in a developing country as Brazil, more specifically in Recife? It is important to notice that a lot of people depend on water corps here and there, and there's also part of the population that deny and sometimes do not know the situation. Mr. Platters, could you reflect on this?
Well, I think my colleagues have also contributed to the answer to this question, although it would be presumptuous of me to pretend to know precisely what version of this strategy is right for Recife. But I would return to something that Edwin showed us, which is a floodable urban public space. And that emphasizes how important it is to open the black box of water management infrastructure. As the question suggests, everybody, and especially underserved populations, depend on water, clean water, and protection from the effects of flooding, which they are especially vulnerable to. And if we can show them how that is actually accomplished, and also make them part of those solutions at a very local level, I think that's a positive way of beginning to organize communities that are usually planned by government agencies that they have no part of and subject to somebody else's massive infrastructure, which is either terrible intervention in their local areas are totally invisible. I think visibility and transparency and trust is a crucial first step. And a lot of the projects and images we've been looking at this morning have that effect. And that is how we, as designers and researchers, can communicate what we're dealing with to communities that are usually not involved at all.
Okay, so it's about communication. Okay, thank you. There is a hand raised by Mena. Mena, can you unmute yourself? Yeah, please.
Yes. Well, in addition to that, what I said, cities always were evolved in direct relation with water. So communities that were living in these cities had this relationship with water. And as was said yesterday in one of the lectures, that, for instance, the population of Recife had turned its back to the rivers. And what you should do is make people aware and make people have that integration with their situation, with their water. And a nice example, I think, is the city of Kampen, where there was asked for a huge dike in front of the city, because the old city of Kampen is completely outside the dike. So there was this idea of a dike to protect the city against the river. And the whole community said, no, we are a city next to the river. We don't want a wall. We don't want a technical solution blocking us from the river. And they organized this committees that, in case of high water, will raise their own flood defenses again, like they did in the medieval periods. And they protect people themselves, protect their areas, their houses, their city against the water. So you have to work with the people, and you have to make people proud that they live next to a river, next to the sea. And there are risks, and they should know the risks. It was until very recent in the Netherlands common to have flood planks in front of your house in case of high water, if you're living outside the dikes or in the lower areas. And that a lot of the climate adaptation could be done by acceptation, the acceptation of living near water, accepting the risk and involving the people in the solution.
Okay, thank you, Mena. That's an interesting position also, I think, for the rest of the workshop. There's a reply from Edwin on the question posed by Frank. Let me quickly read aloud. Because Dordrecht is an island, we can manage a lot on the scale of the municipality. But it's true, if you want to save our city with all the monuments, you have to save the planet. More pragmatic, we have to work together with the province and national government. Room for the river is a big help, but more important is how Rotterdam, the Netherlands, can be protected from seawater rise. For Dordrecht is the Maaslandkering very important. So that's a huge dam that he showed before. I think there was a hand raised by Sarah. Did I see right?
Yes, hi, thanks, Jean-Paul. I just wanted, I don't want to interrupt if you guys are dealing with the second question or comment, but I was gonna just give some feedback to what Professor Alain Platas and Men Kosian, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her name. Mene Kosian? Just mentioned.
Mene Kosian, very well, yes.
Mene Kosian. In terms of how to integrate these ideas from the Netherlands to Recife, and I agree with what they said, but I just wanted to add that aside from thinking of how reconnecting the people to how they use the water and the landscape, there's also a very important factor, which is thinking about how you can understand the difficulties of some people that live in the city, really connect the day-to-day challenges that they have of mobility or even access to decent water, access to safe spaces and things like that to these adaptation measures. Because, and I think that I'm hopefully relating that to the question that was talking about how to really, I mean, bring it to the level where the people are dealing with problems that are so day-to-day that it's almost a luxury to think about climate change in 50 years. You don't have the time to think about that. And bringing that to the urgency of the day-to-day problems is another important element that I think everybody talked a little bit about that, especially Ian Martin talked about it, and also Edwin also talked about it, but in the context of maybe the Netherlands. So maybe think about what are these daily challenges that Recifenses are dealing with that could be, you know, connected. I'm going to stop there. That's it.
No, I think that's an interesting point. So start maybe from the impact, not from the problem. Okay, there's a hand raised by Paul. Paul, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Well, in a reaction to Sarah, thanks for this comment. Being in Holland, it's extremely difficult to say anything about Recife. I'm very much aware, even if I have been to the city, and I think that also counts for our colleagues. So we can only share experiences. But the point you're raising about these daily challenges, and that almost it's a kind of a luxury to have this. I mean, that's what you suggest. But can't you invert it and say that the lack of public spaces can be provided for by creating good public facilities, creating these water defense lines, the parks, the green spaces, all these things which are lacking in big parts of the city. So it's not only something as a luxury, but as a way to provide for the basic services in the city. Or is this a very strange interpretation from abroad? What do you think?
You want to react to that, Sarah?
Oh, I mean, I think I agree. Thank you, Paul. Sorry, I was just agreeing with everything you said. Okay. And I just wanted to bring the idea that there's the question of awareness that Professor Platz has also mentioned, like the communication and being aware, how to integrate these, to be a little bit more technical, is how to integrate these near-term benefits that we expect on our daily lives to these long-term benefits and better understand that they actually go together. I think that would be kind of the direction that I would go, and not thinking about it as a luxury. I was just putting myself in that situation. I don't know if I reacted exactly to your question, but that's my thought.
Okay, thank you. I think there is a question for Lucia. Oh, yet yes. My Portuguese is not well enough to understand it.
Let me go. Never mind. So for Lucia, I'll ask it in Portuguese. So, Lucinha, na sua visão, como os pontos da paisagem, ou mais, a carta da paisagem, podem esclarecer os riscos que as cidades sofrem com as mudanças climáticas e como fazer com que essa discussão se torne mais acessível a toda a população?
A carta da paisagem, ela tem uma visão mais ampla e insere a preocupação com as mudanças climáticas, mas não pontualmente. Então, eu acho que as mudanças climáticas estão entre suas preocupações. Eu acho que uma das coisas mais importantes é essa apropriação do conhecimento pela população. Eu achei muito interessante quando Ian Martin falou das cidades como esponja. Eu acho que a gente teria que expandir o conceito de esponja para as pessoas. Esse conhecimento esponja que tem que ser de todos para que todos possam participar. Eu não compreendo soluções técnicas que não envolvam a população. E, nesse sentido, o Recife está muito distante da Holanda, porque a gente tem um problema fundamental, estrutural, na construção política do país, que não não olha para os mais vulneráveis, e a gente tem que começar a pensar, incluir essas pessoas nas decisões políticas. Então, eu fiquei olhando todos os exemplos da Holanda e vendo, ao mesmo tempo, animada, e o quanto isso também nos desanima, porque mostra o quanto estamos distantes. O Brasil está muito longe de encontrar soluções, mas eu acho que essas soluções estão polvilhadas em várias formas, e não existe forma de atuar para se resolver a mudança climática que não passe pela inserção da população. Então, eu gostaria até de perguntar a vocês da Holanda se vocês têm instrumentos políticos que determinem a ação governamental para todos esses projetos. Porque no Brasil, outra coisa também que é muito problemática é que determinadas soluções elas são limitadas a uma gestão política, e quando a gente muda de gestão, aquela ação que foi iniciada ela não tem continuidade. Então, eu gostaria de saber se na Holanda vocês têm um instrumento político que atravesse todas as gestões e decisões em prol da comunidade e de se resolver esses problemas.
But Tim, if you may.
I think it's an interesting question, also not only related in time, but also in space between different layers in government. Is there one of the Dutch participants who wants to elaborate on this question?
Maybe I can a bit. What we see here
Please.
is that officials are the solution. They are long-term working in organizations in which politics and politicians are often there for 4 years or 8 years, but the officials are there mostly much longer.
Okay, and that is different from Brazil?
The same.
In Brazil, it's the same.
Yeah, maybe if I can add something.
Yes,
maybe
please.
we have we call it the Delta program. It's a 6-year program instead of 4. Government is 4 years most of the time if it fulfills the 4 years. But we have a Delta program which is 6 years, and it exceeds the period of one government. So it reports to different governments during time. So big projects like a big infrastructure project or a big water project exceeds one period of politicians.
Yeah. So you take it out of the political time circle. That's So that could be. So could you think of
informando a população?
Could you think of a model like this in Brazil?
Porque só a população tendo conhecimento, ela vai exigir de todas as gestões que se olhe para esse problema. Então, é uma gestão compartilhada, digamos. Então, por isso que a ideia da esponja, para mim, é tão interessante, quando eu acho que o encharcamento, né, a ideia de se encharcar da consciência não pode ficar restrita aos técnicos, às universidades, né, mas tem que ir para a população e para as instituições políticas, públicas, que exercem a gestão do patrimônio.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, yeah, so it is really how public and institutions relate. Okay, there is a question
Can I add something to that?
Please, Jamart.
Yes, in the Zwolle case, we are working with a region which consists of very, for Dutch purposes, with a lot of different stakeholders from different levels. So we have local government, we have province government, we have national government, and at the same time, in the Netherlands, we also have water boards which is also a local government, but then with water experts. And we all have to get them on board. So what we, in terms of the process of how to get everybody together, we have lots of small conferences, a bit like we do today, where we invite experts to share their views, to share their concerns. And then as urban designers, we show how they can help each other, because most of the time people have the same concern and also the same ambition. For instance, they have the concern to store or they have the problem that too much rainfall leads to a local flood. And they have the ambition to make a good city. And then we can show them as designers. And in that sense, I think design and visualization can help in the process making. We can visualize, we can show how integrated solutions help them solve their problems. And we use design to inspire, and we use design to communicate. And we use design to mediate between different stakeholders.
Coming from a country where the national politics are not so conducive to a large-scale policy change and solutions, I would just reemphasize the importance of local communities not waiting for national governments to wake up to these problems, but actually modeling measures and behaviors that are scalable. Somebody mentioned that yesterday. Our work in Bridgeport actually began in a very disadvantaged, underserved community, building together with local folks a rain garden, showing them how to address local flooding, but also making something that they were proud of. And really, our bigger projects are just scaling up that kind of work.
Okay. Would not there be then a possible problem that individual solutions may be contradicting each other? Or how then should you make sure that local solutions get connected? Oh, I think you are muted.
That's where our role as, let's say, experts comes in to coordinate.
Yeah, okay, coordination. Yeah, okay. Right.
I also think that inspiring them with a framework in which people can act themselves can help. If sharing knowledge on a principle, a really easy principle level, such as if you want to store water, make a big park. Don't make a square, make a big park. It's every time it's this choice. Don't build an extra, don't spend your money on extra cars, but spend it on a good public space where people can meet for a community, for a neighborhood, and then design it in a green way. And then you can address multiple issues. You can address multiple elements at the same time.
But then who is here the one who should initiate? In your situation, where should the initiative start?
That can be on a city level, but it can also be a university student program who goes into conversation with the local neighborhood, but it can also be a local architect who starts. And I really believe in the power of the drawing of the possible future to rally people to act and to go to policymakers like, this is the future we want. Can you help us?
Yeah. Okay. Regarding time, I see some messages coming around. I do not exactly know how we should move on with the program. Mila, I look at you. There are still some questions in the chat, and I think we are having an interesting discussion now. But I think there's also an idea of moving on with the workshop. How can we best proceed?
Okay, perhaps we can answer these questions and try to connect with some final statement, a very brief one for a participant. And then we can move on, proceeding with the workshop.
Yeah, okay. Then maybe we stick to the questions that are still now in the chat, and then we move to the workshop. Yeah, is that correct? Okay. Then there is a question from Fabiano, which is in Portuguese. Fabiano, could you take the floor?
Okay. Let's try to translate it. Okay, you can hear me?
Yes, please. Yes, we can.
The question is the very formation of Recife as a city is based in exclusion and inequality. So it's previewed the poorest inhabitants of the city to be the first and the more affected by the climate changes. Okay, but well. Regarding the image that John Martin brought us of trying to join water, nature, and humanity, it could be possible to reach happiness, as Lucia said, living in palafitas, how can I say, overpile house that have a lot in Recife. So, and last question linked with this one is, how can society in general absorb the problems, understand it, and take part of the construction of the solutions? I know that's not an easy question to answer to, but it's only a provocation.
Yes. Okay, is there a reaction to this?
Maybe I can give a few words, but I have one advantage because I worked in Brazil and I worked mapping landslide and flood areas in the Southeast. So I know a little bit, very little, from a very technical perspective, the reality on the ground, and I can relate very much to that question. I do think that a lot of the solutions that are very interesting and promising were mentioned here. And I think I would go back to the Carta das Américas from Professora Lúcia Veras, which was really interesting, that it really went to a more like applied solution, dividing them into these spectrums of technical solutions and educational and political. And thinking about what are the incentives that actually make these policy solutions work. And we mentioned a few of them here, which were, I mean, some of these are actually controlled through regulations, right? So we can integrate certain regulations that go beyond, through infrastructure, go beyond the political realm, and think about regulations that are going to be long-term, that will assess infrastructure in their full life cycles, think about infrastructures as things that last 50 years. But that's also a little bit problematic when you're thinking about other types of incentives. I mean, when you're forced to do something, it changes the whole game. And when you think about what currently exists, is a lot of market incentives. So you want to make people want to do something because they will get economic benefits. For some reason, it's going to be cheaper to do something one way or the other. And the other, that's an important way to look into it too. But the other very important incentive that everybody here mentioned somehow at one point is this collaborative incentive. So the network incentive, people sharing pools and sharing knowledge and understanding that when they do that, they actually gain a lot from it, be it in terms of increasing the quality of life, or even saving money in some way because they have enhanced mobility or anything like that. So it's very overarching, but I think these ideas, looking in the Carta das Américas, the three realms, and thinking about what motivates people to apply to these things at the individual level or at the political level, is one way to approach this problem. But I understand it's very generic, and I'll let the space for other people to come in and talk about it.
Oh, Sarah, can I connect your answer with Yehum's question? Do you think the approach of the study of South Bay Area is applicable for Recife? Which governmental institutions should be involved? The studies seem to have potential to change great thinking.
Yes, I think so. Thanks for the question. I am sure it is applicable. I can't name especially the institutions, but I think the main idea behind building these networks is really, we've talked a lot about collaboration and participation, and we really have to, I think, break down and deconstruct the idea of who are the stakeholders, what is a participatory approach, and really talk about this in detail, because this will be, for me, the key to actually apply all of these things. And a lot of people here have, I assume they agreed with that. And I think, you can start out by thinking about the problem and thinking about what is the landscape scale that the problem is trying to address, and think about people that are experts there, but also people that live there and people that depend on these landscape spaces to, name the institutions and the stakeholders, or do that for Recife. That would be one approach. Always thinking about who actually depends on the landscape and who will be hurt if the landscape is not managed properly, who is exposed to hazards, I guess. In many, I guess that would be the way, but I don't know, I can't name the institutions like off the top of my head, but it's definitely a good exercise.
Sure. May I add another question related to that? You all can think green if you are in the red, Mariek said. Is there a possibility to combine problems to get a better solution? Who wants to take that one?
I think one idea that I have is that when the problem is closer, the danger is close to your life, and it has impact on your life, then it's easier to provide a small solution that shows visible impact in their lives. Like, coming originally from the disaster country, I'm from Japan, so it's a country with disasters. There are all these different levels of mitigation and also protection, and citizens are very active because it's very important for them to protect their lives and their family. So it is when you are in red, maybe green is closer. And now I'm living in the Netherlands. People's level of awareness and where they need to escape when something disaster happens, it's like non-existing because people believe that it is safe. Most of the time, I live in Amsterdam, and if I ask somebody, where do you go when something happens? No idea. So that can be one of the ways to think about it.
Thank you. This was good, and I had also another intention with the green and the red words. What I meant is you can't think green. You can't think about climate change if your health is poor, or you're out of a job, or whatever, or you're in poverty. So maybe you can combine problems to get a better solution. You can combine climate adaptation or renewable energy, whatever, with the poverty. There's a lot of huge amounts of money go into climate adaptation. Can you use that work and that money to reduce poverty, or people get better jobs? So can you combine the two problems to get a better solution?
Yeah, so then, if I may add, actually it is about interests. We should find where the interests are, the people are, and how and whether they are related to the issues we are talking with. If they don't,
that's a process in which you can people get invited to go in, and you can learn and you can educate people along the way.
Okay, so it's a matter of awareness.
No, it's a matter of letting people join in for the benefit of themselves and for the whole.
I think every plan you have should not only communicate to people, but also educate local communities, because then they can build themselves around this plan, and that will create jobs, will create interest, will create a better standard of life. So it's not only communicating what you're doing, but it's also education.
Okay.
Yeah, and education, not in trying to educate people, but trying to get people out of poverty or get an education, taking care of health, and along the way you educate people.
The linkage between public health and climate change is hugely important.
Yeah,
and often neglected. I participated last week in a conference on climate change and health in the Caribbean. A really vulnerable set of island states. And there often the threats to health, which are so severe, are tied directly to a warmer climates, lack of safe water, too much unsafe water, all of that. And I think we have to do a better job of linking those issues. So thank you.
Oh, to move forward, maybe we have a few time to ask one more question, especially related to the Brazilian and Recife case, which is from Marta. As you know, Brazil is dealing with a serious crisis. I mean, in plural. One of that, we can highlight that it's an economic one. And on top of that, Marta is asking us how to raise money to make these solutions if the government doesn't help because of the lack of budget.
If I may add to that, then I think, and I'm afraid that is true for most of the climate related issues, they can only be solved if they somehow find their own revenues. If they somehow, and that I think is actually what Mr. Platters already mentioned, if you can think of a plan that somehow generates revenues to sustain itself. And then in the end, of course, we should keep in mind, there is no lack of money in this world. There is an abundance of money, and if there is a lack, we make more money. That's not the issue. The point is, do you have a right plan that generates revenues? That is the issue, not money.
And also to add to that, built upon the words of Sarah Lindbergh and of Edwin van Zoon, is a combine. Try to visualize all the stakeholders and everybody who has access to budget, and combine their projects. So combine the necessary infrastructure with a climate budget, and combine a public space budget with people who are in charge of green and healthcare. So prefer the integrated solution over the multiple technical single solutions, and then you can form an alliance, stack your budget, and help each other out.
Het is niet ook also, and that's what Frank puts in the chat. It is how you calculate your profits and your investments. So you also have to think of that in a creative and, of course, feasible way, which need not always be a time frame of 5 years.
Yes.
And it's not only how you calculate your profits, it's also how you calculate your risks, because it's not a problem in the Netherlands because we have enough money and we have the technology. But if a neighboring country to the Netherlands, for instance, Belgium or Germany, has another plan, and we saw that just a few months ago in Limburg with the huge floodings that came for a large part from German and Belgian rivers. If you don't have that assessment that the risk in the Netherlands is also a risk for Belgium, and if you have a problem in Brazil with the modern economic links all over the world, they are as well a stakeholder for our problems as we are for them.
Indeed, and as we know, preventable approach is way cheaper than a reactive infrastructure. So we need to keep in mind that we as Brazilians, and well, I think that we are running out of time. Unfortunately, the discussion is on fire.
Mila?
Someone.
Yeah, Jeroen speaking. This is really why I find the inventory that Sarah Lindenberg presented us so striking, because those non-green solutions can really help to set an example for example, public health gains and other related issues. If the concern of Lucia is that some government bodies are not focusing and not feeling committed to these challenges with some of the examples and the potential shown in this inventory, they might be getting connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeroen. Sarah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, no, it's a very quick, but I think it links a little bit of the question of the funding problem. And I think it's an important thing to talk about, because one of the issues that we're giving more space for these gray infrastructures and saying that adaptation is so expensive is because a lot of the decision-making policy is based on cost-benefit analysis. And there are a bunch of technical problems with that I know that's a whole other discussion. But it's important to know that there are very significant changes to how we measure the benefits of long-term effects of infrastructure and projects in general. And that should really help us understand that, you know, these investments in the short term that we're doing that are, you know, might not be directly linked to something they are going to see tomorrow, are going to bring all the health benefits and the systemic benefits that we need from these infrastructures. And it will help justify the investment in that. And it will create money in that almost superficial but necessary way when we understand that the benefits are coming through later on and giving more weight to these long-term systemic benefits. I think that is a technical kind of key that is also changing. It's going to help.
Okay. Oh, such a provoking moment, let's say, for all of us.
Yeah.
I guess it.
Oh,
please, Jean-Paul.
Mila, regarding time, I think we should decide how to proceed. I think from the Dutch side, people are about to leave and pick up their children and things like that. But on the program, there was still also a point of workshopping between the Dutch and the Brazilian party. How can we best proceed on that?
Perhaps we can, for now, close this session, and thank you for everyone to be here with us. And well, we are excited of all we have heard from today. And the Brazilian team are currently talking to me, saying, "Oh, it's amazing, but we need to reflect a lot and need to digest." And in this perspective, maybe we can say that we can align a few considerations that was made today. We can say that nature as a technology is a transversal theme between the whole lectures. And well, we can say that nature is the biggest technology of the future. The future is now. And well, as well, now we need to keep full in the future and move to our other room to, you know, keep discussing and evaluating and elaborating hypotheses to the team. And after today, I think that we have a lot of material to reflect on, to produce. And on behalf of the Brazilian team, I would like to say thank you, everyone, for being here with us, and well, keep starting our collective network, collaborative network between Brazil, the Netherlands, and well, all the threatened cities. Thank you all for the presentations. It's very inspiring. Jean-Paul, would you like to add something?
Maybe a few practical issues for tomorrow. I think indeed this was a very fruitful and very useful discussion and debate, which anyway we should have done. Yet another point is we also want to workshop jointly. But I think for today time is over. So I suggest we start on the workshopping tomorrow, and maybe at the start, well, there will be some time to do the things that we had thought of doing today. So meaning then maybe, I think tomorrow then we will start, if I mention right, with the two groups, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and then we also made a division from the Dutch part, who will join which group. But then maybe it's good to, in this group, first reflect on scenario 0, yeah, and then move on per group on, well, scenario 1 and the other one, scenario 2.
Fair enough.
Is that okay? Yeah. And then, okay, of course, you in Brazil, you can start your afternoon already, if I understand right, on the scenario 1 and 2. Yeah. And also explain what you so far, what you have been thinking of today, and start from there tomorrow with the Dutch party. Is that the way forward?
Yes, it is. Let's proceed.
Perfect. Then, okay. Then I think we say goodbye now from both sides of the ocean, and tomorrow both sides will join again. That is to say, the lecturers of today will not all join the workshop tomorrow. That's also good for me myself. I will not be a participant in the workshop, but of course I will follow the things that happen.
Thank you very much. I'll talk in Portuguese right now.
Sure.
Gente, muito obrigada pela participação de todos. Não sei se a Arina continua conosco, a tradutora, e estou falando em português pelo nosso compromisso com a ONU Habitat, de colocar as questões em português. Então, gostaríamos de fechar esse momento com esse agradecimento coletivo, convidar a todos para se juntar a uma rede que está em formação e que possamos cada vez mais avançar nesse tema tão complexo e tão desafiador para todas as disciplinas envolvidas e que possamos cada vez mais acompanhar, digamos, a evolução da teoria do sistema global, que vem de um modelo centralizado, passa por uma descentralização e hoje se mostra ser muito mais em rede. Então, vamos em frente. Muito obrigada. E agora vamos finalizar por aqui e deixamos alguns vídeos de alguns parceiros dando sequência a esse momento, enquanto nós vamos para a próxima fase do workshop mais prático. Muito obrigada. Tchau, tchau.
Hola, buenos días.
Bye, everybody.
Soy Juan Carlos Rojas Águas, arquitecto, doctor en Geografía y Ordenamiento Territorial, profesor en la Escuela de Arquitectura de Toulouse, Francia. Quisiera agradecer a los organizadores de este Fórum Recife Exchange with Netherlands por la invitación, así como a la Universidad Federal de Pernambuco, con quienes la Escuela de Toulouse sostiene un convenio de cooperación desde hace ya varios años. Para contribuir a la reflexión sobre el tema que nos reúne hoy, yo quisiera iniciar evocando dos puntos generales antes de proponer varias pistas de reflexión para el futuro de Recife. Los dos puntos generales son: una manera de preparar el futuro es actuando ahora, actuando sobre las causas que aceleran el cambio climático y que están al origen del aumento del nivel de las aguas a nivel mundial. En esto, los arquitectos tenemos un rol bastante importante, pues es sabido que entre las emisiones del sector de la construcción de edificios y las emisiones causadas por el uso operacional de estos edificios, el sector representa 38% del total de las emisiones mundiales de CO2 ligadas al uso de energía. En este sentido, el futuro es hoy, es indispensable actuar ahora. El segundo punto es que cada región, cada país, en función del carácter específico de cada contexto, debe encontrar sus propias soluciones frente al fenómeno de la subida del nivel de las aguas. Las realidades geográficas, sociales, ambientales determinarán y determinan las estrategias a seguir. Algunas soluciones técnicas podrán ser compartidas, pero las respuestas serán locales. Con respecto al futuro de Recife, se presentan varias opciones y son objeto de la discusión en el workshop y en el fórum. Protegerse, hacer frente. La pregunta es dónde y cómo, sabiendo que tratar de parar el océano Atlántico es un gran desafío. La cantidad de energía necesaria para hacerlo también de alguna manera participaría a las causas que contribuyen al aumento del nivel de las aguas. Entonces es algo que debe enfrentarse con espíritu crítico. Y lo otro es adaptarse Y en la adaptación habría tres pistas. Primero, aceptar el recife acuático, es decir, casi que aprender a flotar. El segundo es elevarse, imaginar que el recife de hoy son los cimientos del recife de mañana. Y la tercera sería retroceder, dar un paso atrás para dejar que la naturaleza ocupe el espacio. Ninguna de esas opciones es satisfactoria en sí misma y por sí sola. Será seguramente una combinación de esos